The dog returned 3 days after the snowstorm, mud-caked, ribs showing, and howling low like it carried the sorrow of a dozen graves in its throat. Clara dropped the firewood as soon as she saw it, limping across the edge of her property, unsure whether to weep or scold. It was her late husband's mutt, part shepherd, part wolf, and it had vanished the day they buried him last spring. Everyone assumed it had wandered off to die. But here it was again, fur tangled, eyes wild, pacing in circles near the tree line as if begging her to follow. "What in God's name happened to you?" she murmured, grabbing her coat and rifle. The dog trotted ahead, then stopped and barked once, sharply, before disappearing into the dense woods. Clara hesitated only a second before stepping into the trees after it. The snow crunched beneath her boots as she moved through the narrow pines, the sun bleeding low behind the hills. The dog never got too far ahead, always circling back, barking again, eyes flicking toward something unseen. After 20 minutes, the trees opened into a rocky outcrop, and there it was, a cave mouth blacker than coal, half covered in snow and dead leaves. The dog stopped at the entrance, whining now, tail low, ears twitching. Clara felt the first twinge of dread claw up her spine. She raised the rifle, stepped forward, and ducked inside. The air changed immediately, cool, damp, and thick with the scent of ash and something sour, like old blood. Her boots scraped rock. Behind her the dog didn't enter but lay down just outside, whimpering softly. "Hello?" she called, voice echoing off the stone. Nothing. She stepped deeper, following a thin beam of light that trickled in from a crack above. That's when she saw him. A boy, no older than 10, curled against the far wall of the cave, bare-armed despite the cold, skin smeared with soot and filth, eyes wide and glassy in the gloom, and in his shaking hands was a knife. He didn't lunge, didn't speak, just held it like it was all that tethered him to breath. Clara froze. The rifle in her hand suddenly felt heavy, cruel. The boy said nothing, only watched her with the feral intensity of something more animal than child. She lowered her gun slowly and raised her free hand. "I'm not here to hurt you," she whispered. "The dog led me." At that, the boy's eyes flicked towards the mouth of the cave, where the dog now lay in still silence, watching. Something in his face cracked, not quite relief, not quite fear, but something else. He didn't speak, but his grip on the knife loosened. Clara stepped closer. "Are you alone?" she asked, softer now. He nodded once, just once. "Are you hurt?" Another nod, slower. Clara crouched down, lowering the rifle to the stone. "Let me help you," she said. "I'll bring you food. You don't have to leave, not yet. But you can't stay here alone." He didn't answer, but when she stood and backed toward the entrance, he didn't move to stop her. She stepped outside, heart racing, and the dog rose to its feet, bumping its head gently against her leg. "What have you done?" she whispered, rubbing its ears. "What have we found?" Behind her, the cave exhaled cold air like a wounded thing breathing shallowly in the dark. She looked back once, before heading home through the trees, not knowing that the moment she left, the boy crawled forward and laid his head beside the dog's paw, whispering something in Lakota only the wind and wolves would understand. Clara didn't sleep that night. Every time the wind groaned through the cracks in the shutters, she thought of the boy, thin as a fence post, crouched in the dark with that knife clutched like a lifeline. She'd left half a loaf of bread and a canteen of water just inside the cave before leaving, wrapped in burlap to keep off the chill. She didn't know if he'd touch it, but she had to try. At dawn, she packed a tin of dried venison, some boiled potatoes, and a wool blanket into a satchel, then set off through the woods with the same rifle slung across her shoulder. The dog was waiting halfway to the cave, as if it knew the path better than she did. This time, when she reached the entrance, she didn't call out. She just crouched near the opening and placed the food and blanket gently on the ground. Before she could stand, she heard the shuffle of bare feet on stone. He was there, closer than she expected, knife still in hand but not raised, his eyes locked on the satchel. "It's yours," she said softly. "I didn't poison it." The boy didn't move for a long moment. Then, like a deer approaching water, he slid forward and snatched the bundle, retreating 2 steps before sinking to the ground and tearing at the bread like something half-starved. Clara stayed crouched. "I don't mean to scare you," she said. "You have a name?" He paused, mouth full, and looked at her with something like suspicion. Then, just above a whisper, "Chayton." "That's Lakota?" He nodded. "It means falcon." Clara smiled gently. "Fitting. You've got the eyes of a hawk." Chayton didn't smile. He kept chewing, knife beside him, never more than a hand's reach away. "How long have you been out here?" she asked. He shrugged. "Since snow came. Before that, in trees. Before that—" He trailed off, then mumbled something in Lakota she didn't understand. "Do you have family?" Another shrug. "Not anymore." Her throat tightened. "Did the dog bring you food?" He looked up at her, then down at the dog, now resting beside her boot. "He was my only friend." Clara sat back slowly, no longer crouched in defense. "He used to be mine too. Belonged to my husband. After he died, the dog disappeared. I thought he'd gone off to die. Guess he just went looking for someone who needed him more." Chayton's chewing slowed. He pulled the blanket into his lap, fingers running over the wool. Then, for the first time, he said, "Why'd you come back?" Clara met his gaze. "Because you looked like a child, not a threat. And because someone once saved my life when I didn't ask them to. Felt like it was time I returned the favor." Silence sat thick between them, but it wasn't sharp. It was waiting. Chayton looked down at the knife, then slid it under his leg. Not dropped, not surrendered, but not raised either. A middle place. Clara took it for what it was. The beginning of trust. "You don't have to leave." "The cave," she said. "But I'll come back tomorrow, with more food, and something warmer, if you want." He didn't answer, but he didn't say no. As she stood and turned to leave, he whispered something, almost too quiet to catch. She turned back. "What was that?" He looked away. "Thank you." The words cracked like dry earth in her chest. She blinked back sudden heat in her eyes and nodded once. "You're welcome, Chayton." The dog walked beside her as she made her way home, not limping now, but striding with a purpose, as if its mission wasn't done, but just begun. By the 3rd morning, Clara found a small circle of river stones laid outside the cave, each one scrubbed clean and stacked in a tower no higher than her palm. She didn't touch it. She just set the basket of food beside it and sat down on a mossy rock, her rifle resting across her lap, but her hands far from the trigger. The boy didn't come out right away, but she could hear the faint scratch of movement within, the occasional cough, the sharp clink of something metallic, his knife always nearby. "You build that for me?" she asked aloud. No answer. "Or for the dog?" At that, Chayton emerged slowly from the shadowed cave, blanket wrapped around his narrow shoulders, eyes cautious but no longer filled with panic. He looked at the tower of stones, and then at her. "For both," he said. "He brought you, and you brought the rest." Clara nodded. "That's fair." She handed him the basket and noticed the way his hands shook, not from cold, but from hunger held too long. He didn't eat right away this time. Instead, he sat across from her, blanket pulled tight, and studied her face like it was a puzzle he'd half solved. "Your people think I'm dangerous," he said suddenly. "You think they're wrong?" "I think they're loud." Clara didn't flinch. "And you're quiet." He nodded. "Quiet things get blamed first." "Yes," she said. "They do." For a long moment they just sat, the cave breathing slowly behind him, the forest rustling with small creatures too timid to show themselves. Then Clara asked, "What happened to your family?" Chayton looked away. "Taken. When soldiers came, I ran, hid. Dog found me days later, followed him into the trees." He touched his knife instinctively. "I don't sleep unless I hold this." "It kept you alive." "Maybe," he said. "But it keeps people away too." Clara tilted her head. "Is that what you want?" He didn't answer, just broke off a piece of bread and held it between his fingers. The dog padded forward from the brush, took the bread gently from Chayton's hand, and lay beside him with a soft sigh. Clara watched them for a moment. Boy and beast, both scarred, both unwilling to leave the other behind. "You know," she said slowly, "they're going to notice soon that I've been taking food into the woods. Gant watches my ridge most mornings, always looking for sin he can't punish yet." Chayton's face shifted slightly. "Will they hurt you?" "Not if I lie well." "Are you good at lying?" "Only when it's to save someone." The boy stared at her, then set the knife beside him in the snow. Not surrendered, but placed down. A gesture. A seed of trust. "You have a home?" he asked. Clara nodded. "Small cabin. Leaks in the roof. Warm stove, though, and a quilt made from my mother's old dresses." He thought about that for a long time. "Is there room for two?" Her breath caught. "I'd make room." He didn't say anything else, but when he stood and gathered the blanket around him, he didn't head back into the cave. Instead, he walked beside her, quiet and close until they reached the tree line. At the edge of the clearing, he paused. "If they come," he said, "if they try to take me again, will you still say I'm yours?" She placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "They don't get to decide that anymore." The dog walked ahead, tail swaying like a flag of something not quite victory, not quite surrender. The cave behind them grew colder in their absence. But ahead, smoke from Clara's chimney curled like a new promise into the sky. By the end of the week, Clara had hidden all signs of Chayton's presence. No second plate on the table, no extra boots near the door, no scrap of food left uncovered. She taught him how to step softly through the snow without leaving a trace, how to slip between trees and vanish before a man could blink. He learned quickly, as if his bones already knew how to survive. At night, she let him sleep beside the hearth on a nest of blankets and wool, and when he flinched in his dreams, the dog would curl close, pressing against his ribs until the shaking stopped. She asked no questions on those nights. Some stories don't need translating, but trouble never waits long to find peace. On the 8th day, Clara returned from the creek with her water pail and found Everett Gant on her porch, leaning against the rail, arms crossed, eyes like flint. "Mornin', widow," he said, tipping his hat. "Smelled stew all the way from the ridge. Got me wondering if you were feeding someone else?" Clara forced a smile. "Just me and the fire." "Sure it ain't a redskin hiding under your roof?" Her grip tightened around the pail handle. "That dog came back." "Maybe that's what you smell." Gant's mouth curled. "Funny thing, saw boot prints near Widow's Hollow. Small ones. Fresh." She didn't flinch. "Maybe raccoons have figured out how to wear boots." Gant chuckled, slow and mean. "You know the bounty's still good, don't you? That Lakota boy who ran off from the mission school. They say he slit a teacher's throat." Clara's stomach twisted, but her voice stayed even. You'd believe that? I believe he ran. That's all the town needs. He stepped off the porch. Just remember, Clara, your dead husband can't shield you anymore. You get caught harboring a fugitive. Don't expect mercy from men like Macklin. She watched him ride off, dust curling behind his horse like the tail of a storm. Inside, Chayton had already hidden, under the floorboards, like she taught him. He emerged only after the hoofbeats vanished. He knows, the boy said, voice low. He suspects, Clara corrected. There's still a difference. What if he brings more? Then we don't open the door. That night she burned every scrap of paper in the hearth, old letters, bills, anything that could place a date or a detail. Chayton watched her from the shadows, his eyes reflecting the fire. Do you believe I did what they say? He asked. Her hand stilled. I believe in what you haven't done more than what they accuse you of. He blinked slowly. He hit the others, he whispered. He didn't hit me. I fought first. She didn't push, just nodded. You survived. That's all I need to know. He stood then, stepped over to the hearth, and dropped something into the flames. A torn scrap of fabric, navy blue with a button still attached. Clara recognized it immediately. Mission school uniform. Awesome, it blackened. He said nothing. The dog whined once, then laid down between them. They'll come, won't they? Chayton murmured. Yes, she answered, but they'll come thinking I'm alone. He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time there was no fear in his eyes. Just fire. The same fire she'd felt rising in her own chest since the day she stepped into that cave. They sat in silence as the last bit of uniform turned to ash, knowing the wind outside would carry the scent of burning truth, and knowing someone was bound to smell it. The dog was the first to notice. It rose stiffly from its place by the door, ears pricked toward the ridge, and let out a low growl deep in its throat. Clara stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the tree line. Then she saw him. A lone rider descending the hill. Broad-shouldered, long duster, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He didn't ride like Gant or the sheriff's men. He rode like someone who didn't ask permission, the kind that got paid in silver and blood. A bounty hunter. Chayton watched from the attic, pressed flat against the floorboards Clara had re-nailed just days ago. The dog remained at her heel, stiff as iron, eyes locked on the stranger like it recognized the scent of death. When the rider reached the clearing, he dismounted slowly and tipped his hat. Afternoon, ma'am. Name's Harlan Briggs. Heard tell there's a boy round these parts matches a description on a wanted poster. Clara kept her voice flat. I don't keep boys here. Dog says otherwise, Briggs replied, glancing down. That mutt's loyal to a fault. Been seen circling caves, carrying food in its teeth. Someone taught it to care. I suppose that's a crime now, too? Depends who's getting cared for. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. Creased, stained, official. It bore a sketch of Chayton's face, rough but unmistakable, with the words, Wanted, runaway Lakota boy. Suspected of violence against federal officer. Reward, $40 dead or alive. Clara felt the cold dig deep into her bones, even with the fire crackling inside. You came for a child? I came for whoever matches this drawing. He's 10. So we're a lot of soldiers in this country before they called 'em men. Her grip on the rifle tightened. You're not taking anyone from here. Wasn't asking, he said, stepping forward. The dog snarled, teeth flashing. Briggs halted. Smart animal, he muttered. Protects what matters. But he won't slow a bullet. Neither will you, Clara said, raising the rifle. You fire that, and you become a fugitive too. I've been one before, she replied. And if you touch that boy, I'll become something worse." The air stretched thin between them. Then Briggs smiled. Slow, cruel. "You think he'll thank you for it? He's been hunted half his life. He'll run again. They always do." Clara's voice lowered. "Not this time. Not from me." Briggs took a long look at her, then at the cabin, then finally turned back to his horse. "You're wrong, widow. He'll run. Maybe not now. Maybe not next year. But one day he'll leave, and he won't come back." He mounted up and rode off without another word, his coat snapping behind him like a flag of warning. Clara waited until he vanished into the trees before lowering her gun. Chayton appeared moments later, stepping down from the attic, silent but shaking. "I heard him," he said. "He was right about one thing," she replied. "You've run enough, and I'm not letting anyone make you do it again." He looked at her, tears brimming but not falling. "Why do you fight for me?" "Because someone should have fought for you long before I got the chance," she said, "and because I know what it means to be left behind." The dog rested its head on Chayton's foot, eyes fluttering closed. "We stay here?" he whispered. "We stay," she said, "unless you say otherwise." Outside, snowflakes began to fall again. Light, quiet, steady. But inside, the fire burned hotter than ever. And it would stay that way, as long as it took. The snow thickened by morning, blanketing the valley in a quiet that made everything sound like memory. Clara stitched by the window, mending an old quilt with patches from her mother's dresses, her husband's shirts, and now, scraps from a wool blanket that had once lain in a cave beside a starving boy and a loyal dog. Across the room, Chayton sat cross-legged by the fire, carving a strip of wood with the same knife that had once been his only shield. The blade no longer trembled in his grip. It moved slow and careful, shaping something real, a falcon in flight. "That blade ever cut anyone?" Clara asked without looking up. He hesitated. "No," he said. "Not yet." She smiled softly. "Then it's still a knife for surviving, not a knife for hurting." Chayton didn't answer, but the quiet that followed held a kind of peace between them. The dog snored lightly at his feet. Clara tied off her final stitch and stood. "Come here. I want to show you something." He came, cautious but curious. She held the quilt up and pointed to a faded patch near the center. Tattered blue flowers on a cream square. "My father's shirt. He died before I was born. My mother stitched this from the only clothes he left behind." She pointed to another. Plaid, rough spun, stained in the corner. "That one belonged to my husband. It's what he wore the day we built this cabin." Then she pointed to the newest square, simple gray wool. "That's yours now. From the cave." Chayton reached out and touched the fabric. "You sew your ghosts together," he whispered. "So I don't forget who fed me, loved me, or left me," she said. "It's how I remember I'm still made of all of them." He studied the stitches. "Can I learn? To sew? To remember?" She placed the quilt over his shoulders. "You're doing it already." That afternoon, they went outside together. Clara showed him how to lay snares near the tree line, how to spot rabbit tracks in the snow. He taught her how to whistle softly through a hollow reed to mimic a mourning dove. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. But when the sun dipped low and they turned toward home, Chayton stopped. "The dog never left me," he said. "Not even when I pushed him away." "That's how I know he's yours," Clara said. "He sees you, all the way through." "I think I want to stay," he said quietly. "But I don't know how long I can." "You don't owe me forever," she said. "You only owe yourself the chance to be more than what the world called you." That night, the wind shifted. Not sharp, but uneasy, like something pacing just out of sight. The fire burned strong, and Chayton slept under the quilt for the first time, knife still under the pillow but untouched. Clara sat in the rocker, watching the coals and thinking of the man who warned she'd be left behind. Maybe, she thought, but not tonight. Then, outside, the dog lifted its head, ears twitching toward the ridge. Clara moved to the window and saw it, a faint flicker of fire through the trees. Not a star, not lightning, a torch, moving. Someone was coming. Again. And this time, it wasn't a bounty hunter riding alone. By dawn, the fire was gone from the ridge, but tracks in the snow told a different story. 3 horses, maybe 4, circling just beyond the tree line, never approaching the cabin, never announcing themselves. Clara scanned the prints with a practiced eye and felt it in her bones. These weren't men looking to talk. These were watchers. Hunters. She returned to the porch where Chayton and the dog stood side by side, both staring into the quiet woods like they already knew who was out there. 4 riders, she said, stayed through the night. Chayton didn't blink. One of them whistles. Whistles? Low, like calling a dog. Same way they did in the mission camp, when they wanted us scared before they even showed their faces. Clara's jaw tensed. Then we don't wait to hear it again. She made him practice slipping into the cellar. Quiet, fast, without leaving prints. They rehearsed signals, where to hide the rifle, how to unbolt the trap door from underneath. Ruth arrived just before midday, leaning heavy on her walking stick but eyes sharp as flint. Saw smoke on the ridge, she muttered. That your trouble or mine? Clara motioned her inside. Ours, I think. Bounty man. Or worse. He's got a price on his head that draws more than silver. Ruth grunted. Well, I brought more shells. I'm not sure a shotgun's going to solve what's coming. Maybe not, Ruth said. But it'll make the first one bleed. That evening, as the stew boiled and shadows stretched across the windows, Chayton picked up his carving again. The falcon's wings were nearly finished now, curved just so, sanded smooth. They think I'm something I'm not, he said. That I killed, that I escaped to hunt. Clara looked up from her stitching. And what are you? A boy with no country, he whispered. Too Indian for the settlers, too gone for the tribe, too small for war, too scarred for peace. Clara crossed the room and knelt in front of him. Then let them try to name you, she said, while you carve yourself into someone bigger than all of them. His hands trembled slightly as he handed her the falcon. If they take me, burn this. If they take you, she said, they'll have to burn this house with me in it first. The dog lifted its head and growled once, short and low. Then came the knock. Not sharp, not polite, just a single heavy thud. Clara stood slowly. Cellar, now. Chayton moved without a word, slipping through the trap door as they'd practiced. Ruth sat herself near the fire, shotgun across her knees. Clara opened the door with the rifle hidden behind it. A tall man stood on her porch, long black coat, face pale and weather-bitten, hat pulled low. Evenin', he said. Name's Lucian Cole. I ride for a private outfit out of Dead Horse Crossing. We've been tracking a boy, a fugitive from federal protection. Lakota. Armed. Dangerous. You'll find no boys here, Clara said flatly. Cole stepped forward 1 inch too far. I find liars where boys hide, and I don't like either. Then ride on, she said, before that dog behind you decides to bite. Cole paused, then smirked. Funny thing about dogs, loyal to a fault, but even they break when they see fire. His eyes flicked to the smoke curling from her chimney. We'll be nearby, and next time we won't knock. He turned and walked off, his men visible now in the trees, silent, waiting. Clara closed the door and bolted it tight. Below the floorboards, Chayton whispered, "That was the one who whistled." The fire crackled louder than it should have, and from the woods, the whistle rose again, soft, hollow, cruel. This time it sounded like it knew exactly who it was calling. That night, Clara didn't sleep. Neither did the dog. It paced in slow, wary circles across the floor, nose twitching, ears alert, while Clara sat beside the fire with the rifle across her lap and the falcon carving clutched tight in her free hand. Beneath the floorboards, Chayton lay curled in silence, wrapped in the quilt she had sewn, breathing slow but awake. Ruth stayed too, sitting in her rocker like a statue carved from ashwood, the shotgun leaning against her shoulder, her old hands steady as iron. "You ever kill a man, Ruth?" Clara asked quietly. Ruth didn't blink. "Only once. Took my brother's hand before he bled out. He'd already been shot through the spine. Called it a kindness." Clara nodded, not in judgment, but understanding. Outside, the wind picked up, restless, sweeping through the pines like a voice that couldn't decide what it wanted to say. When the sun finally cracked the horizon, the clearing beyond the cabin was empty again. But Clara knew they hadn't left. They were testing her, waiting to see if her resolve wore thin with hunger and fear. That afternoon, she chopped wood in full view of the trees, not because she needed to, but because she wanted them to know she wasn't hiding. Not anymore. Chayton surfaced only when she tapped twice on the trap door, their new signal for safety. He stepped out from the dark beneath the floor, squinting at the daylight like it might vanish. "They're still watching," he said, brushing sawdust from his shoulders. "Let them," Clara replied. "Eyes don't hurt, not unless you let them change what you do." He sat at the table, turning the falcon carving over in his hands. "I've been thinking," he said slowly. "Maybe we don't need to wait for them to come. Maybe we make them come the wrong way." Clara glanced up. "What do you mean?" "You said it yourself. They're hunters. So let them hunt. We just choose where the trail ends." She studied him. The boy with the knife was still there. But now there was strategy behind the silence, courage behind the calm. "Go on." That evening, while Ruth baked biscuits they didn't need just to fill the air with something warm, Clara and Chayton walked through the back pines with the dog close at their heels. They found an old root cellar from before her time, a caved-in roof, forgotten and overgrown, but still deep. They cleared it, reinforced the entrance with stones, set snares where a man would never expect them. "We'll light the chimney tomorrow," Clara whispered, "just before dusk, when they think we're too tired to fight." "And you'll go in the cellar?" "No," she said. "I'll stay at the table. I want them to see me." "They'll shoot first." "Not if they want what they came for." Chayton watched her carefully. "You'd trade yourself?" "No," she said. "I'll make them think they're winning, just long enough for you to get behind them." The guy dog barked once, low and quick, then sat still, nose to the wind. Clara followed its eyes. In the distance, through the branches, a flicker of motion. Fast, quiet, then gone. A scout, maybe, or a test. Either way, it meant tomorrow would come faster than they wanted. That night, she sewed the falcon carving into the lining of Chayton's coat. "If I don't get to say goodbye," she whispered, "you carry this with you." "Always." "You will," he said, touching her hand. "You'll say it, right after we win." They didn't sleep. Not because they feared dying, but because they finally believed in surviving. And because, beneath the cabin, their trap waited, not for blood, but for proof that even hunted children and widowed women could still decide where the story ends. The chimney smoke rose exactly as planned. Late in the afternoon, thick and curling upward like a flag of exhaustion. Clara made sure the scent of stew drifted far, letting the men in the woods believe she was settling into weakness, not preparing for war. She even left the door unlatched, the curtains pulled open wide enough to see her silhouette move slow around the fire. She wore her late husband's coat, the wide shoulders disguising her frame, her braid pinned under his old brimmed hat. From 100 yards off, she would look like a man home from the hunt. Tired, unaware, easy. Chayton and the dog waited in the trap behind the root cellar, crouched silent as moss. Ruth stayed inside with her shotgun under a wool blanket, seated just to the left of the door. Clara lit 2 lanterns and placed them by the windows, turning their glow toward the trees. Bait. Just as dusk fell, the dog gave a single bark. The signal. Clara stepped away from the fire, her hands shaking not from fear, but from the coiled readiness of someone with everything to lose, and no one left to run for her. The first man came through the trees without sound, dressed in gray, face painted with cold mud. He motioned to 2 more behind him. They moved like ghosts, rifles low, eyes sharp. Clara stood at the table, ladling soup into 2 bowls. She didn't flinch when the door creaked open. "Don't move," the lead one said. She didn't. "Where's the boy?" "Gone hunting," she said, voice flat. "Dog, too." The man stepped inside, weapon raised. "He's here, we know it. Don't make this harder." "Too late for easy," she said. That's when Ruth pulled the trigger. The blast from the shotgun cracked through the air like thunder in July. The man beside the door spun back, rifle flying from his hand. Clara dropped behind the table as the lead man turned and fired. Too high, missing her by inches. In that split second, Chayton struck. He leapt from the root cellar like lightning born of snow, knife gleaming, the dog bounding beside him. The third man never even screamed, just fell backward, wind knocked out, blade at his throat. The lead spun toward the noise, only to find Clara rising with the rifle. She fired once, and the bullet caught him in the thigh, sending him to the floor with a howl. The dog growled, low and vicious, standing guard over him, teeth bared. "Enough," Clara said. The cabin fell silent. Chayton stood in the center, knife still steady, breathing hard but not shaking. Blood speckled his sleeve, not from violence but from a deep scratch along his arm where the cellar's stone edge had caught him during the leap. Ruth reloaded slowly, breath hissing through her teeth. "Didn't think I still had that shot in me." "We all still got something left," Clara said, lowering the rifle. The man on the floor groaned, clutching his leg. Clara walked to him, looked him straight in the eye. "You ride back to Dead Horse. Crossing," she said, voice cold as steel, "and you tell them the boy's not alone. He never was." "They'll send more," he spat. "Then we'll keep building traps." She looked to Chayton, who stood tall despite the cut, face steady, firelight flickering in his eyes. "We'll keep making a place where no one has to hide." The man crawled to his feet and limped out the door, disappearing into the woods where 2 horses waited, but only one carried a rider now. As the fire hissed low and the last light vanished from the horizon, Clara turned to the boy who had once slept beside a knife in a cave. "It's over," she said. "No," Chayton replied, voice calm, sure. "Now it begins." Spring broke like a secret whispered between trees, slow and sure, the snow melting into the earth as green blades pushed their way through the frost-bitten ground. The air smelled of wet pine and firewood smoke. But there was something else, too. Something Clara hadn't breathed in years. Safety. Not peace, exactly. That would take time. But safety, for now, had settled around the cabin like a second roof. The dog lay sprawled on the porch most mornings, belly to the sun, one ear still twitching toward the distant woods out of habit. Chayton no longer kept the knife under his pillow. He hung it near the door instead, beside Clara's rifle. No longer weapons of panic, but tools of living, waiting if ever needed again. Ruth still visited when her knees allowed. She brought seeds, stories, and once even a letter from a missionary-turned-apologist who claimed he was searching for the boy they'd wronged. Clara burned it in the hearth before Chayton saw it. Some things didn't deserve the weight of memory. Chayton had started carving more than just falcons now. He whittled wolves and horses, and once, a rough but proud-looking woman with a braid and a rifle across her back. Clara didn't ask who it was. She didn't need to. One evening, while she stirred a pot of rabbit stew, Chayton set something down on the table and stepped back, quiet but proud. It was a nameplate, wooden, smooth, letters carved slow and deliberate. "This house belongs to Two Roads." She blinked. "That's you." He nodded. "I chose it." "Chayton Two Roads?" He hesitated. "Just Two Roads. No first name, no last name, just what I am now." She ran her fingers over the lettering. "And what are you?" "Someone who walked two paths," he said, "and didn't get lost." Her voice broke as she whispered. "You were never lost." "No," he said. "Just waiting to be seen." They nailed the sign over the front door, just above where the wind always kissed the wood. That night, as they sat beside the fire, the dog at their feet, Clara finally asked what she hadn't dared before. "Do you want to find your people someday?" "I found them," he said without hesitation. "I mean the others, your blood." He looked into the flames, thoughtful. "Maybe, when I'm ready. But only if I get to return here, because this is where I was named, and no one gave me that but you." "In town," they still whispered. Gant never came back, disgraced when one of the bounty men turned up in Dead Horse with a rifle wound and a story that didn't match the lies. Sheriff Macklin stayed distant, too afraid of what had happened in the hills to send more men without a marshal's badge. That suited Clara just fine. They came into town only when needed. And when they did, she stood tall, her hand on Chayton's shoulder, never behind him, never ashamed. Some people turned away, others nodded. One or two smiled. That was enough. The rest would come around, or they wouldn't. But the boy had already survived worse than silence, and so had she. One morning, months later, Clara stepped out to find Chayton standing barefoot on the porch, eyes closed, face tilted to the wind. "What are you listening to?" she asked. "The dog's breathing. The trees. My own name. What does it sound like?" He smiled without opening his eyes, like it was never meant to fit on a poster. She stood beside him, the sun warm on her shoulders, and the valley stretched out before them, not as a place to hide, but as land finally earned. Two roads would grow here, and whatever came next, he'd meet it not as prey or fugitive, but as a boy who had chosen his name, his path, and his family with both hands.